Science deals with facts. Religion centers on belief. When and where do the two converge for people who look to both science and spirituality to guide their quest for meaning? For 40 years, our presenter, Dr. Harold G. Koenig, and his team of researchers has been scientifically measuring the effects of religious behaviors on mental health and physical health. Dr. Koenig pioneered these studies as founder of the Center for the Study of Religion, Spirituality, and Health at Duke University. The opening slide will expand on the many responsibilities he currently carries. For those whose schedule allows, I'd ask for an extra 15 minutes to about 11:45 if needed to accommodate questions and response. So thanks for your indulgence, but if you need to leave, please do. We're delighted to welcome you, Dr. Koenig, to address our minds and hearts concerning your team's findings on the healing power of health.
Thank you, John. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Good. Well, I'm going to go ahead. And first of all, it's great to be back. Apparently, this is the 25th anniversary of the last time that I was there in Goshen. Now, Zoom is not the best way to do things, but it'll work. And I'm excited to be here a second time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then I will go ahead and proceed. So, first of all, let me do a little something here okay. So, here's a bit of an overview. First, I'll talk a little bit in general about my background, and then I'll talk about the role that faith plays in coping with stress, and then get into the scientific research, looking at the connections between a person's religious involvement and various aspects of their mental, their social, and their physical health, and then try to explain how religious faith influences a person's health, and then provide you with some further resources if you want to know more about what I'll be talking about. Okay, so as far as the introduction, again, I'm Dr. Harold Koenig. I was trained as a nurse and then as a family physician. I delivered a number of babies in my time, and then really got interested in geriatric medicine. So then I came to Duke University and did 3 years as a fellow in internal geriatric medicine. And during that time, I did a lot of research and I learned how to do research. And I was focusing in on depression in the medically ill, particularly those who are in the hospital. When people become hospitalized, like John was this past week, a lot of times it's pretty threatening. The pain, the disability, the threat of affecting a person's independence, all of those things can be terrifying, can be very stressful, and you a lot of times feel out of control. And what we found was that 1 out of every 2 people in the hospital actually experienced depression, a significant depression. one out of every two. So I can tell that John was not one of those one out of every two. He was the other part of the two. So he's back with us now, and that's terrific. But in any case, that's my background. And then I began to study geriatric psychiatry. So that's for the last about 35 years, I've been focusing in on geriatric psychiatry. So I see many patients in my clinic here at Duke with depression, anxiety, manic depressive illness, schizophrenia, psychosis, and then just lots of people just struggling with life in many respects as they get older. And getting older, as someone getting older myself, I recognize that it's not easy. It's not easy. And there are many challenges that face us, and it certainly never helps or it never hurts to have some faith. So let's talk about whether or not faith makes a difference. So as I just said, you know, as we deal with these changes in our lives as we get older, we need some comfort. We need some comfort, and we need some hope. And religion is used to cope with problems very common in life, difficult situations, health problems, and threats to health. It's often used to cope with challenges that involve uncertainty. And certainly in the world that we now live in, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety and fear. Religion is also used in situations where you don't have control over what's going on. And we need as humans to have some sense of control over our lives. And religious faith provides that control in many respects. Also, when people get discouraged and start to lose hope, that's when religion helps to bring back hope into the person's life and the belief that something good can come out of all of this. Something good can come out of it. So, on to the research. What does the research find on religion and health? When I was initially going through my training as a nurse and as a family physician, there was nothing said about the role that religion played in the health of people, in their medical conditions, in the health even of older adults. There was nothing said about that. And I had actually got some training saying that religious involvement was something negative. It was something that Sigmund Freud, it said, was not good, was bad for your health. And the less religious that you were, the better off you were. People needed to work through their problems by rationally working them out, rather than depending on, beliefs that could not be proven, that he thought were delusional. And so that's the kind of information I was getting from my training. And yet, when I would go to the hospital and care for patients, I noticed the opposite, that many of these patients who were depending on their faith to cope, praying, reading scriptures, having their pastor visit them, or knowing that people in the church were praying for them, that really made a big difference. They would tell me when I would ask them how they were coping. They would say, "Oh, my church is praying for me." And that gives me hope. That makes me feel like, I can get better. And so I thought, wow, I think maybe somebody needs to do some research. Somebody needs to actually do some research that looks at this in a more objective fashion, because I knew that Freud had some issues. he had some issues, personal issues with regard to religion that seemed to cloud his ability to see any of the benefits that religious faith may have for people. And he was only focusing in on the negative aspects of religion. And certainly religion, like any other powerful thing in life, does have negative influences as people, do things for their faith that sometimes hurt other people. And so in any case, the question here is that overall, what effect does religion have on your health that we can actually observe, using the scientific method to study it? So here is, on this slide, there are a few references here. There's a book I wrote in 2018 that focuses on mental health and religious faith. And then a couple of articles here out of the British Journal of Psychiatry Advances that looks at the latest developments. And so that's where some of this research is. And so I'm going to review it now. Okay, so let's start out with depression. Depression, I suspect that some of you that are listening now may have experienced depression. In the United States, 1 out of every 5 people, 20%, have experienced a significant depression at some time in their lives. And approximately 1 to 2 people out of every 10 are currently undergoing a significant depression. So if you all, now you are church members, so, we'll see what church membership does, but of the 30 or 40 people here, there could be easily 3 or 4 of you who might be experiencing some level of depression. And so you know what I'm talking about here. So in any case, religious involvement based on the 444 studies that measured religious involvement and measured level of depression and see how they correlated, they found that those who are more religious tended to be less depressed. They experienced less depression, they recovered more quickly from depression, and religious interventions or treatments that involved utilizing a person's religious faith in the treatment of depression, that actually worked. That worked quite well in reducing depressive symptoms. Now, here was a study out of one of the top psychiatry journals in the world that actually looked at the relationship between importance of religion in life, and actually the structure of the brain. They did structural MRI scans of the brain, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI scans, like CT scans, but more accurate. They did MRI scans of the brain, looked at the structure of the brain, and they compared the brains of those for whom religion was not important or only somewhat important. They compared those individuals with the individuals who said religion was very important in their lives. And they found the following. They found that actually the thickness of the brain was significantly thicker among those who said that religion was very important in their life. So this was shocking to scientists that actually you could show objectively that the brain of a person who was more involved in religion was actually larger. Well, it was larger by 1 millimeter. Now that's not a large, that's not huge, but it is significantly larger than those individuals for whom religion was not important or only somewhat important. And again, this was published from one of the top, probably the top biological psychiatry journal in the world. So it went through a rigorous review process by other scientists. And they said, yep, this study was done well. And apparently these are the findings. Now, a lot of people say, yes, okay, maybe religion helps older people, but what about younger people? What about religious involvement is not limited in its effects or its benefits to any specific age group. So here is this is a study of 10,000 young people, average age of 23, and they were followed over time. They were followed for 6 years, and they wanted to know whether or not the frequency of religious attendance at the start of the study, whether that could predict the risk of developing a significant depression over time. And what they found that it could, that those young people who attended religious services at least weekly were more than 30% less likely to develop depression over those 6 years. And this was a study that was performed by the Harvard School of Public Health. So these investigators are from the top public health institution in the world, and they're publishing this study in a top scientific journal, showing that young people, that religious attendance apparently protects young people from developing depression over time. Now, what about suicide? Now, as a psychiatrist, one of my greatest fears is that one of my patients might commit suicide. And so what is the connection between religion and suicide? Well, we did a systematic review of that literature, those research studies, and we found 141 studies that had looked at the connection between religious involvement and suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, and completed suicide. And what we found was that 75% of these studies found that religious people are just less likely to have suicidal thoughts, make suicidal attempts, or actually commit suicide. So this was all the research that we reviewed prior to 2010. Now, a number of studies have been published since 2010. Here's a study of over 20,000 Americans who were followed for nearly 20 years, and they looked at the risk of dying from suicide. And what they found, they took into account in this analysis, they took into account their age and their gender and how many people were in their family and whether or not they had attempted suicide in the past and whether or not they used drugs. And they removed all of that from the analysis. They controlled for it. And what they found was that there was a 94% reduction in risk of actually completing suicide among those who were attending religious services twice a month or more often. Now, the Harvard School of Public Health, having been a bit surprised over this connection between, religious involvement and depression, they thought, well, let's look at the suicide rate. So here they followed 90,000 women. These were all nurses, actually. They followed them for 14 years, and they looked at the risk of their completing suicide. And what they found was that among those who never attended religious services, the women who never attended religious services were 7 times more likely to commit suicide compared to those who attended once a week or more. So that made a big difference. Here's another study out of the Harvard School of Public Health. And again, they're publishing in the top psychiatry journal in the world, JAMA Psychiatry. Here's a study of again, this is actually another group of women. This is the Nurses' Health Study number 2. And these are 66,000 nurses that were followed for 16 years. And they looked at the likelihood of dying from a death of despair. Now, what is a death of despair? A death of despair involves death from alcohol, drugs, or suicide. And that's why it's called deaths of despair, because when you're over drinking, when you're using drugs, there's often despair. And certainly when you commit suicide, there's despair involved there. And what they found is, once again, they find a 70% lower risk of dying from a death of despair among women who are attending once a week or more. Now they decided, well, we're going to look at this in men and also. So they happened to have a large group of men, 43,000 men, who they were following now for over 25 years. And these were all healthcare professionals. These were dentists and pharmacists and optometrists and osteopaths. Even they had veterinarians in this sample. And they had followed them for 26 years, again, looking at the risk of dying from a death of despair based on their involvement in their religious community, how often they attended religious services. And once again, they found a nearly 50% reduction in dying from a death of despair among those attending once a week or more compared to those who never or almost never attended. So, it seems like attending religious services has a major impact on mental health and in the likelihood of dying from mental health problems. So it's now, you might be wondering, well, is it only religious attendance? Well, it's religious attendance, but here is a study that we did. We measured not just religious attendance, but how often people prayed and how often they read the Holy Scriptures and how close of a connection they had with God, how intimate a relationship they had with God. And we looked at that in a scale. We have a 5-item scale that measures that. It's called the Duke University Religion Index. And we administered it to over 3,000 veterans, U.S. veterans, and we looked at their risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, and alcohol use disorder, both over their entire lifespan and just within the last, couple of months. So what we found was that for lifetime post-traumatic stress disorder, lifetime PTSD, there was more than a 50% reduction among those who scored high on a measure of religious involvement using that 5-item Duke Religion Index. So the higher the score they had, if they were scored in the upper half of the scores that the whole population, took, the upper half on that scale, they were more than 50% less likely to ever have experienced PTSD. And it was true for lifetime major depression as well. So there was a 50% lower risk if they were more religious. There was a 1/3 lower likelihood of experiencing, an alcohol use disorder over the lifetime among, again, those scoring in the upper half. And then when they looked at current post-traumatic disorder and current alcohol use disorder, there was a more than 70% reduction in risk of those problems, again, among those who are more likely to attend services, pray, read the Scriptures, and have a close, intimate relationship with God. Now, again, here we go with alcohol use, abuse, and dependence, much less common in 80 to 90% of the studies. And illicit drug use, not surprising, significantly less common in 80 to 90% of the studies. Now, let's look at the positive side of mental health. Let's look at well-being and happiness. I've been talking about depression and suicide and alcohol use and drug use. All of those are negative things. Let's look at the positive side of things. Does religion make any difference in that respect? And apparently it does. In fact, it has even a greater effect on positive emotions than it has on the prevention of negative emotions. So here is our systematic review of 326 quantitative studies published in academic journals in medicine, nursing, public health, social, the social sciences, and psychology. And of those 326, nearly 80% found that religious people are simply happier. They simply experience more positive emotions on average now, on average. And of those 326 studies, only 3 studies found that religious people experience lower happiness than those who are less religious. So when you consider that, there are 80 times more studies showing that religious people are happier. Now, they're happier because they have more purpose, meaning, and hope in life. So of studies looking at purpose and meaning in life, they virtually all show that those who are more religious have greater meaning and purpose. In nearly half of the, actually 3/4 of the studies, religious people have more hope. They have more hope in life. And they're more optimistic about the future. And having more meaning and purpose, being more hopeful, being more optimistic is going to have consequences in terms of recovery from medical illness. So, with John Bender, he had that kidney stone. If he had not have his faith that gave him meaning and purpose and hope and optimism, he might have been in the hospital for 10 days instead of 5 days. And that's true more generally. That's what the research shows. Okay, what about social health? Religious people have more friends. They have more friends. They have more support. Oftentimes because they're part of a religious community like you all are. You have developed friendships, some of them lifelong friendships through the church. So in general then, people who are more involved in a religious community and who are more religious in general tend to have more support, more social support. And also, not surprisingly, they are less likely to be juvenile delinquents and to commit crimes when they're adults. Again, in over 80% of this research. Again, that's not surprising, but but it's been documented now. Now, what's also interesting is that young people, like maybe your grandkids or your kids, those who are in school, do better if they're more religious or if they come from a religious home. And actually, there were 10 separate studies that looked at that. And every single one of the studies showed that the religious youth have better grade point averages. They're more likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to go to college. They just do better academically if they're more religiously involved. And they have a better peer group as well that helps to steer them into a more healthy kinds of behaviors. What about marriage? Believe it or not, those who are more religious have happier marriages. They have more stable marriages. They're more likely to have 2 parents in the home. In 80 to 90% of the secular research that's been published in academic journals. Here is a study, once again, the Harvard School of Public Health. They're following these nurses over time. This is a 14-year follow-up of 66,000 originally married women. and they followed them over 14 years, and they looked and they wanted to see whether attendance at religious services at the start of the study, 14 years earlier, could predict the likelihood of divorce or separation. And lo and behold, they found that women who attended religious services at least once a week, and preferably twice a week, were nearly 40 to 50% less likely to divorce or separate during those 14 years. Now, this is how we put it all together in terms of the impact that religious involvement has: attending services, praying, scripture study, volunteering for religious reasons, religious education, religious devotion, religious coping, how that influences the mental and social health of people across their lifespan, from literally infancy all the way to old age and death, basically. This is all outlined in the 3rd edition of the Handbook of Religion and Health that's coming out actually next month. Now let's look at physical health. I've been talking mostly about mental health and social health, but does all of this have any difference in terms of your physical health, your physical independence, your ability to care for yourself, and your longevity, how long you live? So actually, there does appear to be some effect. We did one of the first studies to look at the relationship between attending religious services and the strength of the immune system. Now, we all know how important the immune system is. You know, the immune system is what prevents us from getting infections like COVID-19, like the flu. Our immune system is what fights that off. It also fights off whether or not we develop cancer. Cancer, the immune system surveys the body and detects small little cancer cells and destroys them. So the idea here is that it's a good idea to have a strong immune system if you want to live long and you want to be healthy. So of the studies that have really objectively looked at this, more than half find that religious people have stronger immunity. Here is the first study. This is the one we did. It was with older adults, 1,700. And again, what we found was that those older adults who attended more often had stronger immune systems. Now, this is an interesting study. This is a follow-up study of 382 people who were HIV positive. You know, they had the AIDS virus. 382 of them, and they were followed for 12 months. And they looked at whether or not, they simply asked them at the start of the study, do you attend church or not? Okay? And they measured the concentration of virus, the HIV virus, in the bloodstream. And they looked at over time whether or not those who attended religious services had lower levels or higher levels of virus in their blood. And they found that those who were attending religious services at the start of the study actually 1 year later had lower concentrations of virus in the blood compared to those who didn't attend religious services. What about cancer? Here's a study, again, of 10,000 young people, average age 23. Young people have a lot of reserve. You know, they have a lot of reserve in terms of fighting off cancer, but apparently young people do get cancer. And this was a study of these 10,000 young people, average age 23, up to 6 years they followed them, and they found that these young people's likelihood of developing cancer was almost 2/3 lower if they attended religious services at least once a week at the start of the study. So the frequency of attending religious services for these young people predicted nearly a 2/3 reduction in risk of them developing cancer over the 6-year period. Here's a study of 75,000 women. Again, these are all nurses, showing that cancer mortality is actually lower, significantly lower, 20% lower among women who are attending religious services more than once a week. There is actually a physiological reason for the effect that religion has on cancer. Every single one of us are born with a cancer suppressor gene. So we inherit a gene from our parents. It's called the cancer suppressor gene. And the purpose of this gene is to suppress cancer from developing. And what these researchers were able to show is that religious involvement was related to lower levels of inflammation, which was related to higher levels of the cancer suppressor gene. So consequently, apparently religious involvement fosters activity of the cancer suppressor gene, which helps to reduce the rate of cancer. Religion is also related to heart disease and to blood pressure in the majority of studies based on our systematic review. Let's look at blood pressure. So here's a study of older adults, age 65 or older, and we found that those who attend religious services every week and who pray or read the Bible every day, that their likelihood of developing high blood pressure is lower. It's about 40% lower compared to those who are attending religious services less than once a week and who are praying or reading the Bible less than once a day. Here's another study, yet one more, from the Harvard School of Public Health. They have really gotten excited about this religion and health research since they found that, the young people apparently don't experience as much depression. They have less cancer. Now they're looking at, to what extent it affects their blood pressure. And 44,000 women without high blood pressure followed for 12 years, looking at the risk of developing high blood pressure. Well, those who are attending religious services at least once a week are about 10% less likely to develop high blood pressure during a 12-year follow-up of these 44,000 women, nurses. What about stroke and cerebrovascular disease? Lower rates of stroke among those who are attending religious services to any degree compared to those who never attend religious services. This is death from cerebrovascular disease or stroke. Again, Harvard School of Public Health published in the mainstream medical journal, coronary heart disease. Even over there in Israel, those who are more religious are going to do better during, what's been going on there here lately. They're going to do better if they're devout believers, if they attend synagogue regularly, if they, they pray, so it's not just for Christians. So apparently people who are Jewish, as well as those who are Muslim, who are devout followers of their religious faith, seem to have better health and have better cardiovascular health as well. Here's again out of the United States. Again, 90% of these people are Christian. Lower rate of death from heart disease, from heart attacks among those attending at least once a week, if not more often. More often is better. And this is survival after open heart surgery. This is out of Dartmouth Medical Center in New Hampshire, showing that those individuals who were depending on their faith to cope and were part of a faith community that provided support were 14 times less likely to die during the 6 months following open heart surgery. So, if you're planning to have open heart surgery, it's time to start getting religious. Let me just put it that way. Okay. And overall, people who are more religious just live longer overall. They live on average, if you're white, 7 years. The difference in longevity among those who do not attend religious services compared to those who attend at least once a week is 7 years. If you're African American, it's 14 years. 14 years difference in longevity. And look, here is all-cause mortality, again from the Harvard group, showing a 1/3 reduction in risk of dying during a looks like 16-year period among those who are attending more than once a week religious services. What about dementia and cognitive functioning? I know that none of you are worried about that. Well, I'm worried about that. I have passed my 70 years, and so I'm worried about this. But if you're highly religious, you're less likely to develop cognitive dysfunction as you age. This is even among Alzheimer's disease. So if a person is highly religious and they have Alzheimer's disease, they will have a decline in their memory significantly slower if they're more religious. Here is a study looking at episodic memory. This was a study of over 1,000 adults over the age of 50 that were followed for 12 years, and they found that prayer made a difference in terms of enabling individuals to retain their episodic memory over those 12 years. But the effect was not the same for meditation. So if you meditated, you did, I don't know, yoga or whatever, it wasn't the same. You had to be praying to God for this to make a difference. Physical functioning. Those who are more religious, this is coming out of Europe. This was a 10-year prospective study where people were followed, 15,000 across Europe. They were followed for 10 years, and they found that those who were more religious, the most religious people, had a slower decline in their likelihood of developing impairments in their activities of daily living. And it was statistically significant and published in a major European journal. So this is how we understand all of this. I know we have to stop. I understand that. But I just wanted to show you briefly that the reason why religion affects health. Excuse me? Okay. This is how religious involvement affects health. It does it by belief in and submission to the will of God. This then is manifested in terms of religious practices, which then affect a person's positive emotions and social connections, resulting in better immune functioning and better cardiovascular functioning and greater longevity. So in conclusion, religious involvement is related to better mental health, greater psychological well-being, better social relationships, less delinquency and crime, better health behaviors, and consequently, better physical health outcomes and greater longevity. These findings have huge implications for public health and healthcare costs as religious involvement becomes less common with each younger generation. And, science and technology become the primary sources of truth. This research has substantial clinical applications for provision of social, mental, and medical services as well. And most people don't know about this research. Most of your healthcare providers have no idea how important and how vast this research is. So here are some further resources quickly, and then I'm going to stop and let you ask some questions. So we have a free monthly e-newsletter that you can sign up for free. It comes out every month. Here's the Handbook of Religion and Health. This is coming out on November 28th. It's over 1,000 pages. It's by myself and two co-authors from the Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Medical School. It costs $200. Now, you might decide, heck, maybe I'll just buy this book, or you could pay $8 and get this book, which summarizes it in for the layperson. Nothing more important. Truly, there is nothing more important than faith in God. It affects all aspects of health, well-being, and physical health as well. So this is a little book me and my wife wrote. We tell our personal stories. We talk about faith and the challenges of believing and how you overcome those challenges. Now, if you want to do more, you want to learn more about this, if you want to do research in this area, we have an all-day Zoom workshop that you can attend if you're interested in learning more about moral injury, which are the consequences of transgressing one's moral values and the emotional consequences. In February, we have an all-day workshop for that. All of these are by Zoom. And if you want to know how to integrate this into patient care, or if you're a physician or you're a nurse, then we've got one by Zoom on March 16. And come to North Carolina in August and spend 5 days with us and really learn about this research and how to do it. Here's our website to sign up, and that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing right now. We have a little time for questions.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Just a note that the PDF will be available to each of you via our distribution that Joan Hursty does. And this 1999 book, The Healing Power of Faith, is right on the mark, and it will be in our church library. I'll donate that. Your questions?
Question.
You mentioned that African Americans who attend worship regularly live longer than white persons who attend worship regularly. Why is that? Is that because African Americans are more active in?
The reason for that is because there is a significantly higher rate of death in African Americans from drugs, alcohol, from crime, all of those things. And it's the religious community in the African American population that helps to prevent all of those deaths from those behaviors. And it's really what's preventing even a higher death rate among those in the African American community. And that's why the African Americans who are more religious don't get involved in those activities. Consequently, they live 14 years longer compared to white Americans who have a lower death rate in general.
Your studies compare various religions like Buddhism, Christianity, or maybe conservative versus liberal Christianity?
It's very, very difficult to compare different religions. Part of it has to do with the fact that Buddhists and Hindus are a minority in the United States, as are Jews, compared to the overall Christian population. So minority groups are always under greater strain and stress than are the majority, majority religious group. In general, let me just say that it's the devoutness, it's the level of commitment and surrender to one's religious beliefs that is the key. So if you're a devout Buddhist, if you're a devout Hindu, you are going to derive benefits from that. If you're a devout Jewish person, you're going to derive benefits. If you're a liberal Christian, if you're a fundamentalist Christian, if you are devout in your belief and in your practice, you will benefit. So it doesn't really matter which particular religious group. Most of our research comes from Christian groups. So we can definitely say for Christianity that it makes a big difference across all denominations. We have less research in other religions besides Christianity, but it looks like the relationships seem to be similar. But are they as strong? You know, there is something about Christianity that involves the nearness of God, the nearness of God. You know, God came to earth as a human. There are no other religions that believe that other than Christianity. He came to earth as a human to be with us, to experience life as we experience it. And that may have additional benefit. We don't know, though. We just don't know. So I would just speculate that, but there's no proof of that at all.
If I may.
With health benefits of this magnitude, why are there not more medical schools or other training institutions for nurses giving this some prominence in the curriculum? What are some of the barriers that you sense out there?
Well, first of all, in general, the healthcare profession tends to be secular in general. And given that everybody's so busy, nurses, doctors are swamped, they're basically ignoring this. They're ignoring it. It's not that anybody's criticizing it or saying that it's not true. They're simply ignoring the health benefits of religion because it may take some additional time to address spiritual issues in patient care. Plus, most are not trained. They don't know how to do this in a way that is respectful to all patients from all faith traditions. And so consequently, that's why I'm having this all-day Zoom workshop. Both actually, we do it also in person here when people come for the August workshop on how to integrate spirituality into patient care. And, you know, I do a lot of lecturing and training of medical students about this. But, you know, there's only about 10% of schools that have required courses on spirituality and health of medical schools. We actually did a study of medical schools, and only about 10% have a required course on this. And we're hoping that with the publication of the 3rd edition of the Handbook of Religion and Health, that one for $200, that it's going to be, they are not going to be able to ignore it anymore. The amount of research that is accumulated is just simply too large for this to be ignored. So we think that with this handbook, this is going to put it on the map of medical schools and nursing schools as we move into the future.
One lingering question that I have, or current dechurching that's happening, how will that affect health?
It's a very good question. You know, the rate of religious attendance is dropping. It was 50% or 40%, according to Gallup polls back in the 1990s, early 2000s, down to 22% of the population are attending weekly or more. Even belief in God has dropped. It was 99% back in, you know, the 1960s and 70s. Now it's down to 81%. And among young people, ages 18 to 34, it's down to 68%. So apparently 1/3 of our young people have no belief in God even, let alone attending religious services. So what are the consequences for health and healthcare costs? They're going to be vast. And that's one reason why the Harvard School of Public Health is so interested in this, because this is going to affect the healthcare costs of not only the United States, but as countries worldwide become less religious, there's going to be increase in rates of alcohol, drug abuse, suicide, and more disability, and more chronic illness because of the the lower effect that religion is going to have on the population in terms of people controlling themselves. A lot of this has to do with self-discipline. Religion helps people to control themselves in terms of their behaviors. And that is what is causing chronic disease, is behavior. And so religious people live healthier lives. And so they have less chronic illness. They live happier, healthier, and longer lives. That's just what the research facts are showing.
Dr. Koenig, you've given us so much. Please accept our thanks.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Blessings to you and your work.
Thank you. Same to you.